Sawicki to present an essay on the Polish Bolshevik War and the Battle of Warsaw. Mr. Sawicki, please.
Thank you. This August we celebrate the 98th anniversary of the Battle for Warsaw, the world's first major victory over communism. It is difficult for us to imagine the momentous importance of this battle today. The situation was dire. Mikhail Piłsudski approached the Polish capital of Warsaw at the head of the Red Army, fresh from their victories against the White Russians in the Revolution. Vladimir Lenin was bent on conquering the city, and with Poland out of the equation, he would open the floodgates for a Europe-wide communist revolution. The Poles had been engaged in a bitter fighting withdrawal from the defeat at Kiev. Warsaw would be their last stand. Poles refer to this battle as the Cud nad Wisłą, or the miracle on the Wisła River. And now, almost 100 years later, after the fact, it seems nothing short of a miracle. The battle has been ranked by historians as one of the top 20 most important battles in the world's history. It has been compared to the battles of Tours, Lepanto, and the breaking of the siege of Vienna. A battle on which rests the future of European culture, religion, and liberty. As Warsaw began to be surrounded and besieged by what seems the defenders as an unending and unstoppable tide of Red Army soldiers, Józef Piłsudski, the Polish head of state, took full command of the situation. Many of his advisors and generals begged for him to sue for peace with the Soviets, as any attempt by the Polish to counterattack or break through the Soviet lines had been met with defeat and renewed in sweeping advances by the Soviet Union. Just when all hope seemed lost, a series of events turned the tide of the battle. The 203rd Ulan Regiment, in a daring nighttime raid, took out a radio transmitter at a Red Army command post at the town of Ciechanów. As the Soviet communication network began to fall apart, a team of Polish mathematicians and cryptographers broke the Soviet radio encryption. The Polish Cipher Bureau then, humorously, began to broadcast the Book of Genesis on loop over the remaining Soviet stations, thus sowing confusion and cutting off the Red Army from the rest of its command structure. It can be mentioned here as well that this was not the end of Polish code breaking. During the Second World War, Polish mathematicians would help lead the way in cracking the German Enigma code. In the meantime, however, the Polish government called for all men of goodwill, capable of bearing arms, to join the ranks of the army in the trenches in front of Warsaw and defend the city to the death. The message was clear. The whole nation must stand and resist like a solid, immovable wall. On it, either the tide of Bolshevism would be broken, or they would perish in the attempt. Thousands came. Supplies of equipment and ammunition were running low. Regiments of workers came forward, armed only with scythes and staffs. Women enlisted as frontline medics, many of whom would soon be thrust into the cauldron of combat as the battle progressed. Even troops of Boy Scouts and students assembled to hold the line against the seasoned Red Army, foreshadowing the bloody uprising that would later define the city 24 years later. The Poles were not alone, however. American pilots in the famed Kościuszko squadron flew reconnaissance flights reporting on the Soviet army movements and spotted faults in the Red Army's battle line. They inherited the enemy's supply lines and helped bring the Poles the advantage of air superiority in the battle to come. They would later be integral in the defense of Lwów, an important city besieged by the Soviets southeast of Warsaw. Despite their great contribution, the Battle of Warsaw would not be decided in the air. It is both through their skill in reconnaissance and code breaking that the Polish military became aware of the faults in the Soviet lines. Due to infighting and competition between the Red Army generals, one section of the Red Army had moved southwards towards Lwów in order to claim the glory that would come with conquering the ancient city. This presented the Poles with an unprecedented opportunity to strike back and seize the initiative. Piłsudski's daring plan revolved around exploiting the gap that had formed in the Soviet line. He ordered that any veteran troops, tanks, and heavy weapons be brought back and pulled away from the defensive lines around Warsaw. They were to reform and wedge themselves in the gap between the two Soviet flanks, thus surrounding the Red Army. The plan was a gamble. If the attack failed, the Poles would lose a majority of their military, and Warsaw would be left defended by conscripts and militia. The operation was almost ruined when a courier that had been carrying a copy of the battle plan was captured by the Soviets. The Soviets, learning of the plan, thought it impossible and absurd, and blamed it as, and they said, some kind of weak attempt by the Polish intelligence to try to deceive them. The enormity of the military maneuver cannot be understated. Polish units, exhausted after over a month of fighting retreat, marched on foot to muster in positions which were sometimes over 100 miles away. The Poles launched their counterattack on August 17th. It was a hard-fought battle. The Poles sustained 36,500 casualties. But eventually Piłsudski's plan paid off. The Poles broke through the Red Army and found themselves behind the Soviets. Before Tukhachevsky realized what was happening in the retreat, the Red Army had suffered over 100,000 dead, wounded, or captured. Soon after the Battle of Warsaw, the Soviets began to sue for peace. The Polish victory shocked the world. The world had bitterly prepared for the consequences of the Polish defeat. They could finally breathe a sigh of relief. The Poles had overcome seemingly insurmountable odds and cut down the Red Army, and with it, lended the dream for a global revolution. Tukhachevsky came back to Moscow in disgrace. He was later secretly put on trial and executed under Joseph Stalin's great courage. On March 18, 1921, the Poles and Soviets signed the Treaty of Wilno. While the treaty ensures temporary stability between Poland and her eastern neighbor, it also created an undefensible border and led to ethnic tensions, which in turn led to the tragedies that plagued the region during the Second World War. Poland had suffered much during the Polish-Bolshevik War. Much of the eastern part of the country was in ruins, the political situation was unstable, and the country struggled to recover. It took considerable willpower and sacrifice on behalf of the Polish people to rebuild in the aftermath of the war. In the decades to come, the light of the Polish spirit of resilience continued to see its people through dark times. I'd like to end today with a quote by Piłsudski, which I think best sums up the nature of the Polish people and their belief in liberty and freedom. Polacy mają w sobie instynkt wolności. Ten instynkt ma wartość, jaką wartość ceni. W Polsce nie można rządzić terrorem. The Polish people have within them an instinct for freedom. This instinct has worth, and I value it deeply. In Poland, you could never rule through terror. Thank you.